Señoras y señores, bienvenidos y gracias por venir. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome and thank you for coming. My name is Gordon Giebert, and I am the academic coordinator for the International Affairs Society, the largest nonpartisan student organization on campus and the official student organization of the Elliott School of International Affairs. Spain is a country very dear to my heart, one that I have lived in and visited many times. I would argue that it is almost impossible to find any culture so rich, any cuisine quite as magnificent, and any countryside so stunning. When I learned that former Spanish President José María Aznar was a visiting professor in the DC metro area, it became my goal as a freshman last year to bring him to speak to campus. Today, with my help of many others, in particular Professor Erwin Lagadek and the staff of the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, that goal has been accomplished. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Professor Francisco J. Rodriguez Jimenez, who will be introducing President Aznar. Professor Jimenez completed his PhD at the University of Salamanca in 2009 while working as a part-time professor and as secretary of the historical journal Studia Histórica, Historia Contemporánea. Currently a visiting Fulbright at IRIS, his topical interests are American studies, anti-Americanism, American high culture versus popular culture, culture diplomacy, and soft powers of different states in a comparative approach. His book, Antídoto contra el Antiamericanismo, American Studies in España, 1945 to 1969, was recently published. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor Jimenez.
Well, good evening, everyone. Let me start by thanking the International Affairs Society for organizing this, and especially to Gordon and Jeremy, and also to my institute director, Henry Hell, for supporting me to this great opportunity to introduce Presidente José María Aznar. As has been said, I completed my PhD about history and international relations, and most focused on the United States and Spain relation and cultural and intellectual history. So for me, it's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to interact with one of the most prominent political leader of this period in Spain. To make a very brief metaphor, is right the same as if some of my colleagues studying, let's say, American Civil War had the chance to talk with Abraham Lincoln. So for me, it's a real pleasure to have here one of the persons who was a main force in that project that I'm studying. Well, I would like to read two quotes that I hope will help to launch the debate afterward, which is the purpose of being here. The first one is a quotation by Albert Einstein saying that it is easier to disintegrate an atom than to disintegrate a prejudice. And I repeat, it is easier to disintegrate an atom than to disintegrate a prejudice. And the second, by one of the most reputed historians of the Cold War, says that ideologies make it easier than it might otherwise be to cope with reality. They provide simple model of complex phenomenon. They generate rhetorical justification for action. My question here is, are those affirmations who were valid for understanding the Cold War still useful for understanding the post-September 11 war affairs? Before leaving the podium to Mr. Aznar, which is the important thing here today, I'll be briefly considering the relation between Spain and United States in the last century. It is fair to say that not only Mr. José María Aznar, but also his grandfather tried to reduce the gap, to erode the mutual stereotype and prejudice among the two societies, Spanish society an American society. Manuel Aznar Zubigaray, his grandfather, wrote in the Spanish newspaper Semana articles about American history, American Navy, American University in the early 40s, a period in which mutual distrust among the two societies was quite evident, quite clear. Then he moved in the early 45 to Washington, D.C. and worked for the embassy and also to the news agency EFE. Well, everyone knows very well that Mr. José María Aznar was president of Spain from 1996 to 2004. So I don't want to expand in details about that. However, let me conclude by saying a few things about his period that I think are quite remarkable. The first point that probably is quite unknown by American public is that Mr. Aznar himself suffered a terrorist attack by ETA in 1995. Aznar's armored car prevented him from being assassinated. A terrible and dramatic episode which could have killed him, but paradox of life happened only 1 year before he was elected in 1996. The second point I want to remark here as very important in his period was that Spanish economy was not that good in 96, and he worked hard to make it possible for Spain to enter in the euro. And this happened in 1999. And last but not least, also something that I think is important, he made a promise to leave power only after 2 mandates, and he fulfilled that promise. Something that, in my humble opinion, following the American model, should be not voluntary but compulsory in the Spanish political system. With further ado, please join me in a round of applause to Mr. José María Aznar.
Buenas noches, good night, good evening, and thank you very much, Gordon, for your to organize this event, and thank you very much, Professor Francisco Jimenez, for your kind introduction, and thank you very much to all of you for to be present here today, and thank you very much, George Washington University, this school, for inviting me. It's my first time in the George Washington University. It's not my first time in Washington. Not my first time in the university, but it's the first time in this university. Well, I would like to respect the orders of organizers, and she told me that I must to explain some consideration about the exercise of leadership and some remarks about two special questions, Iraq and terrorism. And then in the time for questions, you can speak about the thing that you decide you question. Well, let me start with about leadership and thinking, especially during my years in government. Let me start with some general propositions. First, about the nature of politics. To me, politics is power, being in government, being the president, is about making things to happen. To govern is about making decisions and taking action, not about sitting on armchair waiting for solutions to emerge spontaneously. Politics is about shaping events. Actually, if a government is not proactive enough trying to influence events, really will, at the end of the day, dictate its policies. Just the opposite of what I believe is good governance. Unless one chooses to do nothing, a government responsibility is to take action. The second consideration I want to make is about the context of decision-making. Unfortunately, as you know very well, the world is not a perfect place, fully transparent, where we have all the elements at hand to make an informed decision. On the contrary, in real life, information comes in disparate pieces, full of noise or distractions, many times because of deceptive maneuvers by others. For a leader, the question thus is it possible to take decisions when we do not have an exhaustive or perfect knowledge of the situation in question? In politics, it is almost impossible to be aware of every aspect of a particular situation. This is for the simple reason that reality is complex, multifaceted, and above all, ever-changing. It changes at the same time as our decisions start to take effect. What is more, when we are dealing with other human beings, this situation becomes even more complicated to understand. We are not talking about inert objects, but subjects that show initiative and react to our decisions and actions. And as I said before, they do not always do so in a clear and open manner. Whatever the case may be, if the question is whether it is possible to take decisions based on incomplete or imperfect information, the answer can only be a resounding yes. First of all, this is because exercising power means exactly that, exercising authority, taking decisions, and taking action. The world, the economy, or society will not wait for their leaders to build up the perfect pictures of what is happening around them. It is essential to believe in what you do. And for this reason, it is essential to know what you believe in. And that leads me to my third and final general consideration. Leadership must be based in clear principles. Effective leaders must be principle-centered leaders. They must know what they want to accomplish, to make a clear distinction between what is good and what is bad for their countries, and to take the right decisions on time. And finally, leadership and popularity rarely go together, either because great leaders are ahead of their time or because they are forced to look directly into the darkest side of humanity, deciding and taking actions over unpopular issues. The truth is that most of the time, they have to fight also their own public opinions. And now let me turn to more concrete issues. Iraq and terrorism. Iraq has been a difficult challenge, no doubt about that, and we all must pay tribute to all that gave their lives for an open, democratic, and viable Iraq after Saddam. Thanks God, after many years of conflict, Iraq now, it is a working nation, self-sufficient, with pluralistic institutions that performs well. The final outlook is promising. Actually, it's even more so in the context of the so-called Arab Spring, a movement that, as you know, spread rapidly from Morocco to the Gulf, putting an end to the case of dictators and traditional rulers, and transforming the social and political landscape of the entire region. In a moment where the hopes for freedom and tolerance had been put into question by the rise of Islamist forces in many countries, from Tunisia to Egypt, today's Iraq can play a very important role, and through its example, influence the new leaders and make them understand that Islam can be made and should be made compatible with democratic and pluralistic processes. And some remarks more about this. First, the history of current Iraq did not start or came out of the blue in March 2003. Actually, the world was dealing with the problems since Saddam rise to the top. He was a dictator with unmatched ambitions and a particular taste for aggression, as anyone in the region can tell you. The United Nations itself was dealing with Saddam since 1999, when he invaded Kuwait. My first personal involvement with Iraq was not in 2003, but in 1990. I was the leader of the opposition, and the government at the time, socialist government at the time, took the decision to send some ships to enforce the United Nations embargo against Iraq after Saddam invaded Kuwait, as well as to give active logistical support and the use of Spanish bases from where to launch heavy bombers. I support that decision. Second, unfortunately, the 1991 war liberated Kuwait, but led Saddam to stay in power. The dream that assumed that Saddam will behave afterwards soon revealed itself as a dangerous fantasy, and the international community had to put in place a complicated, costly system for containing Saddam. Sanctions, embargoes, exclusion zones, and active air patrolling. Even so, Saddam increased to his defiance, pervert United Nations programs like the Food for Oil scheme, and even expel international inspectors from Iraqi soil. 2003 was not the first military action since Desert Storm in 1981. Actually, President Clinton asked for my support for a punitive air raid against Saddam in 1997. The US plane were turned back in mid-air on that occasion because finally Saddam accepted some of the demands advanced by the United Nations inspectors. A year later, when Saddam refused to cooperate and threw the inspectors away, I was asked again by President Clinton to give my support to what's called Desert Fox, a 3-day aerial campaign against key elements of Saddam's regime. Third, on top of that, and in the middle of the continuous crisis motivated by Saddam, the attacks on 9/11 took place, and that changed the strategic game ever since. So, the 2003 Iraqi Freedom Campaign not only was prepared in the midst of the new war on terror, but cannot be understood without the urgency and threats that Islamist terrorism present at that time. The possibility of a Shia-Sunni lethal cooperation, the scenario of nuclear material going into the hands of committed terrorists put Saddam in the eye of the storm. Spain, as a member of the Security Council of the United Nations at the time, and in exercise of its sovereign rights, and under my government, gave support to the process in the United Nations that led to Resolution 441, condemning Saddam, and asking for all measures to be employed to eliminate the threat he represents. It was a support in the diplomatic field, it was a political support. But I have to set the record straight. Spain did not send troops to participate in combat operations. In the last day of hostilities, I support vessels with medical facilities reach the southern port of Basora to provide humanitarian assistance. Later on, after combat operations were over, Spain deployed ground troops in the framework of the international coalition formed by more than 40 nations and following UN resolutions that call upon the members to help the recovery of Iraq after Saddam. Finally, another government, the socialist government, that took office after March 2004 elections, decided unilaterally to pull out the Spanish troops from Iraq. It was a controversial decision, in my view, a very serious mistake that had lasting consequences for our bilateral relationship with America and our allies in NATO. Let me touch now on the second issue, terrorism. Unfortunately, this is an issue I know very well, as our professor said before. Spain has suffered for more than 30 years the constant killing by ETA, the terrorist organization. I have seen friends, very close friends, and many good citizens fall under the bullets, bombs of the terrorists. I myself suffered a car bomb attack, and during my last days as president of the government, Spain suffered its most devastating and cruel terrorist attack in our history, killing 200 innocent people, as in June 2000. The idea I want to convey to you is that in order to combat terrorism, it is neither capacity nor strategy that really counts. In my opinion, there is something that counts before this factor and is even more essential: the will to defeat it. When I arrived in power in 1986, I developed a policy of defeating terrorism in Spain using all the legal instruments at the disposal of a law-abiding democratic government. No shortcuts, just the application of police activities and legal measures. Second, terrorism is a tactic used to achieve some goals. It is usually a part of a larger strategy, and so it has to be confronted in all levels. Terrorist cells, of course, but also political wings, propaganda apparatus, financing scams, etc. We needed also to combat its ideology, because terrorism is associated with criminal action, but also have totalitarian goals. When I left office, the terrorist group ETA was almost finished, clearly in operational capabilities. Unfortunately, after 2004, the new government believed that they could engage the terrorists concerning their tactics, violence, but leaving aside their political goals. And that proved to have very negative consequences, in my opinion. Terrorism was also affected by the dramatic events of 9/11. On the one hand, people was more sympathetic to those like Spain and US that has suffered the death breath of terrorism. On the other hand, Islamist global terrorism was perceived to be a grave threat. I don't think I need to elaborate more in this point. We all have very vivid memories of these years from 9/11 to the elimination of Osama bin Laden. Finally, don't believe that terrorism has been defeated already. Al-Qaeda may have been decapitated and surely is more fragmented than before. But there are two trends that force us to be very vigilant. The first one is the uncontrolled dissemination of conventional but powerful weapons, particularly from places like Libya, where rebels depose rulers, but the environment has evolved into a chaotic situation. Perhaps Syria may be next in that regard. To give you an example, the strength of Al-Qaeda in Nigeria nowadays is due to the flow of weapons, munition, and explosives coming from North Africa. Yemen is another case in point, as it is Hamas in Gaza. In both places, you can find now sophisticated systems that were in the stockpiles of Gaddafi. The second is the almost permanent temptation to decouple means and ends when talking about terrorism. For instance, under current circumstances in my country, it's indispensable to understand that if the terrorists use their violence as a tactic to achieve a totalitarian goal, it cannot be accepted the abandoning of their tactic in exchange of accepting their totalitarian goal. Terrorism has to be confronted both in its means and in its end, and in its goals. This factor is an essential factor for me. This is some remarks about personal experience, about leadership, to single and important question. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, please join me in thanking President Aznar once more. We will now be moving into a question and answer session. President Ethnar will take questions from the audience members. Mark, or Roddy and Josh have the mics, so I guess I will call on people and we'll start. Yeah, Andres.
You can ask in Spanish as well.
Buenas tardes, señor presidente. Mi nombre es Andrés Barona y yo soy aquí un estudiante de estudios latinoamericanos aquí en la Universidad de George Washington. Mi pregunta es la siguiente. Teniendo en cuenta que estos últimos años cumplen el bicentenario de la independencia de muchos de los países latinoamericanos en respecto al reino español, ¿de qué manera ve usted las futuras relaciones entre el Estado español y los correspondientes estados latinoamericanos?
Should I translate quickly, or
How many hours to answer?
should I translate quickly, or the question has to do with the
I can
king.
explain the question.
Right. Okay, just making sure.
No problem. But for us, for Spanish people, if you like, for me personally, Latin America is Iberoamerica, as you prefer said. Latin America is a high priority. It's not necessary to explain the reasons, because historical reasons, cultural reasons, traditional reasons, with the same history, same people, same language, same values. I cannot explain the life of my country without America. I cannot explain myself without America. And I am sure that the future of Spain and Latin America are very close. Spain is not only a cultural factor, a historical factor in Latin America, is the most important European investor in Latin America, the second investor in the world, largest investor in the world, in the region. First is US, and second is Spain. But in some countries, first is Spain and second the US. But our commitment in cultural and economic terms is very impressive. Second, in recent times, for instance, Spain traditionally has been a country that produced immigrants. A lot of Spanish immigrants go from Argentina or a lot of countries in Latin America, some last century, on the 19th century. But recently we received a lot of immigration from Latin America. We receive in more or less 8 years, more than 5-6 million immigrants. Most of them Latin Americans. But there is not problem for integration for these questions. Second, in our recent history of the Latin American republics that we commemorate, we beginning to commemorate this year, for me it's very important to know that this is the expression of one of the expression of liberal revolution in Spain. Liberal in the sense, in the European sense of the word. It's not don't talk about the right or left. Liberal in the historical liberal revolution in Europe that began in Spain. Even the word liberal is a Spanish word. And the consequence of this, that put finish to the authoritarian and traditional monarchies and regimes in Europe, produce consequences as in America in terms of independence of the republics of the different territories. The people, as you know very well, better than me, the people that leading this process was exactly the descendants of the Spanish that arrived in other times in these countries. Not exactly the native population of the countries, but the descendants of the Spanish people. No? But now I think it's a good moment to reflect about the possibilities in this moment for Latin America. And in this process of 2 centuries, what things are going in the right way, what things are going bad. And, well, it's a very intellectual and very interesting reflection. And I will participate in this reflection with a lot of interest.
Well, I would like to take the advantage of being here also to make a few questions. It's again, it's a pleasure, and well, I could stay here hours and hours talking with you, but as time is brief, I would like to ask you about 2 things. First is about how you understand in nowadays society with social media and everything, how the public opinion has changed in comparison with how was the public opinion affecting power or leadership in the Cold War. Do you think that now is more difficult to understand it, and therefore is more, as Walter Lippmann defined it, more like a very erratic thing that is not that necessary? And the second question is regarding the Spanish language in this country. I studied some time ago with the UNED in Madrid, a university in Madrid, how the Spanish language was growing across the world, and how the Spanish government was trying to promote this as a sort of soft power strategy to sell a good image of Spain. As far as this study conclude, the means and the effort were not satisfying the demand in this country and in other cases. Would you say that this was a lost opportunity for Spain when we have a better economy to increase our leadership in the world through the promotion of Spanish language? I don't know if I made myself clear.
No, I understand. The question is that, in my view, the force of the Spanish language is unstoppable. For many times. This means that for some politicians, this is unstoppable. Go ahead. No,
my concern is which is the role of the state to promote it, and therefore to...
But this is one question. Second question, sometimes I define my country with like a cultural power. We have not a military power. We have a good economy, not in this moment, but and my time is a very good economy. My time, but I defend. For instance, I use sometimes one expression, very simple expression. Our nuclear bomb is the language. It's a simplicity, it's a simple definition. But it's extremely important, and I can relate some stories about this. Here living more or less 50 million people that speak Spanish. When you arrive to Washington Airport, Dallas or Reagan, you speak it. You read and listen in English and Spanish. But you arrive in New York, it's the same. But you arrive in Atlanta, it's the same. But in Houston, it's the same. In Los Angeles, it's the same. Everywhere. And is it possible to do now, to do politics here in the States without take account of the Hispanic factor? Okay. And it's necessary to distinguish Spain and the Spanish language. I think the people that are speaking Spanish with Hispanic roots I always had this thought. The relation with America is a double direction, and the roots in America. Having said before that I cannot explain personally my country or Europe without America. One root is Hispanic roots. Another root, obviously predominant in the last times, is the Anglo roots. One of the expressions of the Hispanic roots is language. You can imagine, for instance, here there are a beautiful girl that speaks French, because you? No, you. I speak with you in French, no? And no, with you, no. Some people here, one girl speak French, all this, here, because I speak with her.
I saw that, so
I don't know. Okay.
I can certify.
Can you imagine
Very well.
50 million people talking French in the US? No. Can you imagine? No. Can you imagine French policy in relation with the United States if in the United States living 50 million people that speak in French? I asked this question a French president, in very controversial moment. But they then explain about the Western deployment in Iraq. We have been a very serious confrontation between different leaders in Europe, French and German position and the others. And I asked the president of France, excuse me, how is your position? What would be your position if U.S. living 50 million people that speak French? A good question, Jose Maria. Sure, it will be different. Well, this is a huge reality. Another question is that the Spanish institutions, in particular Spanish institutions, are aware of these circumstances. Some people are aware of these circumstances, and other people no. It's interested in other things. But this is a very, very enormous and powerful expression. When I finish, when in the European debates, when some European leaders established relating with the productions of the countries of the companies from the U.S., the so-called cultural differences, cultural factor, that establish difference between Europe and U.S. and pay tax, raise barriers in cultural products. And I said no. It is absurd. Why? Because one part of the most important production in the Spanish language came from America to Europe. And they cannot stop this. This is absurd. It is logical of point of view of France. But France has a very nice language, but it's a declining language. And the Spanish is very nice language, but it's very powerful language. This is the question.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't remember what is your first question.
The first question is about public opinion, and as this
but it's more difficult to do politics now.
The thing, like Walter Lippmann, this philosopher describing the Cold War, he said that public opinion is a major force in order to understand international relations. Is it the same here nowadays with this changing war in which the media and are like shifting?
Maybe it is true, but the world has changed a lot. And the pressure of the media over the politician today is terrible.
Yeah, but
It's non-existent in the whole world.
If we come to terms like when the Spain entered in the agreement with the United States for the war in 2003, the Spanish public opinion was apparently quite against the war. If I may ask, and in terms of leadership, how a president of a state that is my state, my country, which I love, and how yourself could deal with that and to make it important or not important in the last moment when you have to decide.
No, it's important.
I know this is quite difficult, but I think it's important for the audience to understand how this has changed or not lately, considering that the media have changed.
But this is important, but the responsibility of one leader is take decisions
Without
thinking in the general interest of the country, national interest of the country, thinking in the best for the world of the situation. If you put another example, if Winston Churchill asked British people if they want to go to the war against Hitler, Britain said no. Fortunately for us, they don't ask the people. He don't ask the people. Didn't ask the people. He takes the decisions. Fortunately for the world. And he has a lot of examples of this. But to have a clear idea about a moral and political idea about the clarity of the decision is extremely the interest of national interest of security in general is extremely important. But the public opinion is under the effects of different powers of different factors, no? And that is very different. The job, the true job of a leader is assume the responsibility.
there is a
And respect the democratic process.
following with that, there is a recent book about Kissinger and how he affected to the U.S. foreign policy. And one of the conclusions of this book is that, like, in spite of all the reports that the National Council could offer, or in spite of all the factors, sometimes the last decision is more based on the emotional factor than a leader could have than in those rational factors. That, I don't know, then if it's a rational decision.
I don't know. I appreciate very much. I appreciate very much Kissinger, but for me, rational factor is fundamental in the process of taking decisions, more than an emotional factor. Well, to be emotional sentiments, emotional feelings is extremely important for the life of a leader, of a life of anyone. But I personally don't believe a lot in a leader with it is an expression of sentiments, only sentiments, or take decision only based on sentiments. No. I prefer.
No, the argument is like even if sometimes there are rational factors to take a decision.
Absolutely.
In some cases, not always.
Not always.
Emotional.
Okay.
Could be the driving
okay.
force.
But to be a rational process of decision is fundamental.
Okay, I'm going to take now 2 more questions from the audience because unfortunately we're running out of time. Yes, the gentleman in glasses.
Thank you, President Tesner. Sorry, I have a question.
One question or 2 questions?
Just one question.
One question.
You talked about the consequences of pulling out of Iraq in terms of the relationship with the U.S. and with NATO. So I was wondering if you could talk about the consequences of going into Iraq, especially because 1, it was a very unpopular war, and 2, because the UN didn't find any weapons of mass destruction. Thank you.
Yeah, I am agree with you. This is not popular war, but this is not popular as well, Saddam for Iraqi people, no? This is the question. You can say, you are against war? Me too. But I don't like war. You don't like? Yeah, I don't like war. This is not a question. There is different situation among or between wars. Why? Why you can justify the attacks in the Balkans without United Nations resolutions, and now in Iraq with 18 resolutions for the United Nations? Is Saddam the better condition than Milosevic? Was the better condition Saddam than Milosevic? No. You can agree and disagree. I understand very well. And you can find problems, and you can say, well, what is a good and bad decision? I agree. At the time, in the interest of my country, I support politically this decision. And one simple remark today. Personally, I believe that the circumstances that happen today in the Middle East, in the Muslim world, have some relationship with the things that happen in Iraq. Why? Because a lot of people, millions of people, in different countries in the Muslim world, look and see men's and women's in Iraq voting in free elections and trying to forge new institutions, system, for the first time. And this produced consequences. And you can agree or disagree. But that happened today in Middle East is not exactly the things that imagine some people, for instance, here in the US. Because some people here in the US, with all my respect, thinking that the problem of the US in the world is a problem of image. It's a promise of lack of sympathy. No, the problems of the US in the world is not the lack of sympathy. The problem of the US in the world is that the US is the first power in the world. This is a question. And you can assume responsibility or no. But if you're thinking that making 2 speeches, you change the Muslim world or produce a golden era in the relations between Muslim world and the US, you are totally wrong. Totally wrong. And well, maybe in the life, people must take controversial decisions. But if you are sure that the decision that you must take this decision. This is your responsibility.
Okay. Yes, you.
Buenas tardes.
Muy buenas.
My question tonight was how do you see the relations between Europe and the United States in the last months that I've been here? I have been seeing, like, especially, for example, in the State of the Union address of the President, that America is not looking towards Europe anymore. So, and I would actually want to bring the quote of a Spanish politician this Christmas who said, "We are in the path of becoming a very old and nice museum to the rest of the world." So I would like you to build a little bit on that. Thank you.
First of all, I am an Atlanticist convinced. I defend the Atlantic values. And my political goal in international arena was put Spain in the center of the Atlantic policy. Because the center of the Atlantic policy define the world, or define the positions on the world. And this is my role. And I take a lot of decisions in this way. We talking about this a few moments ago, a few moments before. And I believe in these values. I believe in the value of pluralism, of liberty, of tolerance, of democracy, equality between women and men and women, well, freedom, religious freedom. I believe in these values. And I don't apologize. I don't like to apologize for defending these values because in my view, are the best values. And if some people threat these values of these societies, I react. And I hope that different people reacted. And the world, after the Second World War, Atlantic policy is the direction. The world is under the direction of the Atlantic policy. You know, that is based not only, but basically is the alliance between Europe and US. It's obvious that things changes in this moment. Relations between Europe and US are good relations now? The answer is yes. Very deep relationship. Culturally, economically, politically. And the other side is the question is Europe a priority for the US today? And the answer is no. It is true that Europe is not already a problem for the world. But it is true that it is not a priority, at least for this administration. Why? Because in my view, different people in this administration is not educated exactly in the Atlantic values, if not in a mix of values. Second, economically, the world changed. And America look as priority today to the Pacific and not to the Atlantic. This is a reality. And America, I don't know exactly what is the policy in the Middle East and America in this moment. But Europe is not exactly a priority. This is dangerous. Why? Because the world needed this alliance. There is a lot of people in the world concerned today for some political decision in US, no? You organize a pullout of US from Iraq. You organize a pullout from Europe. You organize a pullout from Afghanistan. You organize a pullout of different parts of the world. You establish the doctrine of leadership behind the scenes. The circumstances change. No? Obviously, if you look the world economically, the direction of the world until now reside in the G8. G8 is the alliance between Europe, America, and Japan. But today is the G20. But the G20 is the same that the G8? No. It's more difficult today because the interest inside the G20 is very, very controversial, very confronting interest. The interest of Brazil, an emerging power, is different than the interest of European countries, for instance, no? Or the interest for India, for instance, no? Or China. But the world changes. We must accept this, but to face the challenges of the current world, I think reinforce the classic alliance between America and Europe would be a good decision, and I support this idea. No? And I continue to believe that the values that we support and that we has created and under the rules we live in are the good values.
Thank you. I'm now going to introduce our chairman, Jeremy Lillian, who will make some final remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me once again in thanking President Aznar for his appearance here tonight.
It is not enough, again.
Very rarely are we so honored to have a guest whose actions made such a dramatic difference in the world. President Aznar, your message of taking action will not go unheard, as we at the Elliott School and the George Washington University pride ourselves on seizing the opportunity to become the leaders that you have described so well. For joining us here tonight, we'd like to present you with a departing gift as a token of our gratitude.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very much. I will use, huh?
Yeah.
I run in every day.
Perfect. Before we close the event, I'd like to make a few more thank yous. A special thank you goes to Gordon Giebert for all of his planning and his hard work on this event. Without it, none of this could have been possible. Also, to Professor Jimenez for his opening remarks and his diligent and intelligent questions. Other thank yous are for the Institute for Russian and Eurasian Studies, especially Caitlin for all of her help, to President Knapp's office for their support in this event, and of course, as always, to the Elliott School for everything they always provide our organization. Thank you guys very much, and have a great evening.